Alexi, my friend, welcome back to the show. It's been a while, man. I want to say it was right before the summer actually got going and your busy Copa America and Euros coverage. How you been?
I'm good, my friend. You look good. Long live the mutant gene. Look at you, you hippie. Your hair's growing all long. Oh my God, look at this. This is insane. You got the swag going over there. I love it. I love it. I love it. You look good. You sound good. I'm ready to go.
Yes, I'm excited. But before we get started, I just want to mention real quick that obviously Hurricane Helene has been devastating to a couple states. A state that I live in, East Tennessee, or the region, the town over has been decimated. It's completely flooded. A lot of people have lost their homes, especially in Western North Carolina, Georgia. So I just wanted to say that our thoughts and prayers are with those people. I'm going to be putting a link in the description for anybody who wants to donate. There's a lot of people in need. So hopefully those people, a lot of those people are okay that were affected and that they come back stronger than they did. They can come back stronger from this situation.
Yep, these are Americans. This is our country, and I know we're in highly charged political times right now. But the reality is that when all is said and done, we are all Americans, and as you mentioned, a huge swath and almost a corridor of destruction down there. My mom has a place in Asheville. Thankfully, she wasn't there when it all happened, but it's just complete devastation up and down that corridor. And a lot of people for a long time are going to need our not just our prayers and support, but literally material and goods and help in order to get out of this. And it's going to take a long time. But one thing I know about Americans is when we do have crisis and when we do have problems, they step up. And so I have no doubt that Americans will step up and help our fellow citizens in this time of need.
Yeah, so I'm going to put that link in the description below. If you can help out, it's greatly appreciated. Yes, like you said, we need to come together like we do as Americans and band together and help these people out and come on the other end of this. But moving on to some soccer talk. Last time we talked was right before Copa America. And I want to say, if I remember correctly, you were I don't think you were necessarily optimistic. You were kind of like on the fence about it. But now that's over. We got grouped, and it obviously did not end well, and it cost Greg Berhalter his job. So reflecting back on Copa America, what is your thoughts about how the USMNT performed and ultimately Greg Berhalter's undoing?
Yeah, I mean, the summer of our discontent and certainly a summer of failure relative to the performance at Copa America. And we had talked about this before about how important this summer was going to be, the last, I guess, real test in a tournament with quality that was elite and certainly quality at times that was better than the U.S. And for Greg Berhalter, relative to 26, which we know is so important, this was his last test. And ultimately, he and this team failed. And so I think rightfully and fairly so, a change was made. And I do think, and I don't want to speak for you, but with the announcement of Mauricio Pochettino, I think there's a general excitement and maybe a cautious optimism here. We recognize there's not a lot of time. I mean, there's 9 windows, 18 games, Gold Cup next summer, and maybe something else out there, but very minimal time with the team, very minimal games, and certainly very few competitive games. I mean, with all due respect to a Gold Cup. And so he's not a magician, but his charge is to make this team, which I think we all agree is talented, play better and individually better and obviously collectively better right now. And he has a great pedigree. This was, I think, a sexy type of hire that satisfies and checks a lot of boxes there. He's never coached internationally, and so he's going to have to adjust to that as opposed to the day in and day out type of job that he is used to. I think he will be fine. But I think in general, people that loved Greg and people that didn't love Greg, I think everybody is, like I said, cautiously optimistic and happy that if we were going to make a change, that we're bringing in somebody like Mauricio Pochettino. But no assurances, no guarantees, and ultimately he's going to be judged just like anybody else in terms of getting those results. And 2026 obviously is coming fast and furious down the pike, and that's ultimately where he will be judged.
Yeah, and I remember in our conversation that I was maybe a little bit more bullish on our talent. I kept referring them, which you've heard this numerous times, the golden generation. You probably heard that ad nauseum. You're tired of hearing that. And I did delegate or blame Greg for a lot of their shortcomings. And I remember you pushing back and saying, well, the players aren't innocent in this either, right? They hold a lot of a blame for the USMNT coming up short. And I do agree with you after what we saw, but I do think a lot of that has to do with coaching and motivation and getting these players ready to go. But at the end of the day, I do agree that once the players are on the pitch, it's all in their hands, right? That's their time to shine. That's the time that they earn their money. Well, not with the national team, but that's the time that, that they have to prove themselves. And I do think Greg did fail at getting these players motivated.
Hang on. Just 1 second. Yeah. Yeah, it's all right. I'm just going to finish this up. Sorry about that. All right.
No, you're good. You're good. But Greg just really struggled to get these players going. Now, when Pochettino, we'll transition into the Pochettino talk. Hopefully, he can get these players, knock them down a peg, right? Kind of like let them know, hey, I don't care what team you're playing for and what league, you have to earn your spot. And I said this a couple weeks ago. I think that that's a problem with our team, is that back in the day, even in your career, it was like all of our players had to prove themselves, Alexi. Everybody had a chip on their shoulder. I feel like some of these players nowadays, because they play at Chelsea, they play at Juve, they play at Milan, that they feel like they've reached the pinnacle and they don't really have anything to prove anymore. Like they've done something that the American player has never, well, not never done before, but it was very hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So a lot of different things there.
Yeah.
Let's head back to Greg just for a second, because I think it's worth revisiting. In no way am I absolving Greg Berhalter of responsibility. Although, I mean, it should be said. Listen, if Tim Weah doesn't get that red card, maybe this is a different conversation that we're happening right here. And you know, Greg Berhalter or any coach will tell you, hey, sometimes it's a fine line, and it can go one way or the other. But ultimately, Greg Berhalter was responsible for this group. I think you did hit on something interesting.
Hey, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure you give it a like down below. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell notification so you never miss any of my videos. I appreciate all the support. Now, back to the video.
In that, I'm okay. You know, the golden generation, whatever you want to call them, whether it's calling them a golden generation or just pointing out their talent, I don't think that is detrimental. I don't think that is problematic. As a matter of fact, I think it is important to continue to stress that this generation, more so than any generation in history, has been given incredible opportunity and pathways and resources on and off the field from a very young age. And with that comes higher expectations. And I don't think that it's delusional or unrealistic to expect more out of this group. Having said that, and this is kind of where you get into the grumpy old manning thing. Maybe we created a monster. You know, I'm incredibly proud that they don't have to deal. I mean, this generation doesn't have to deal with a lot of the crap that we went through. I mean, that's what you want. You want to pass it on, and you want to give it in better shape than when you took it. And I stood on shoulders of other people, and they can stand on our shoulders. That's a good thing. However, if you become complacent, and if you don't recognize that you continue to have to work and hopefully pass it on in a better place, but the only way that gets done is with hard work, that's problematic. And to your point, I think Mauricio Pochettino, his first order of business is to come in and recognize how much he needs to kick them in the ass. And I do think they need a kick in the ass to say, you know what, stinks just like everybody else's, okay? Yeah. And just because you are playing at these incredible places, just because you're making this incredible money, recognize that you are on the shoulders of others. And with that comes higher expectations. And it can go away. And you sure as hell don't want to leave it in a worse position than when you took it over. And I think they're in danger of doing that because, let's be honest, this team still, with all of their talent, has yet to do anything that we have not seen done in the past from a World Cup perspective or even from an impact perspective. They have that opportunity in 2026. Certainly, they wasted that opportunity in 2024. And so that's a long way of saying, I hope that Mauricio Pochettino comes in, maybe in the same way that Emma has come in, although a little bit different type of circumstances, Emma Hayes with the women's team, but doesn't suffer fools, doesn't have any sacred cows, and says, hey, there is a new sheriff in town, and this is how it's going to go. And if you want to be part of it, great. If you don't, thank you very much for your time, and there's the door. and put together a group that recognizes, not just recognizes, but grabs a hold and relishes the opportunity and the responsibility that 2026 brings on and off the field. And then you're cooking. And I hope that he sees that. I mean, like I said, he said all the right things. There's a kind of joy and a confidence in his press conferences. But again, these are just press conference types of things. Ultimately, we got the first window coming up here next week, and then a competitive window in that following window. So with Nations League and stuff like that. So then we're going to start to see who he brings in, who he doesn't bring in, and are there any discernible changes that happen on the field individually or collectively.
So you had mentioned earlier that when that you thought this was a sexy hire. Like, it's got the name, it's got the glitz, it's good on paper, right? But what was that your initial reaction? Like, were you actually happy with the hire? Were you surprised that they were able to get someone of his caliber?
I mean, look, if you attach the number that's floated around of 6 million, and it could probably be ultimately more. I mean, this is, first off, this is a short-term type of lease, if you will, with Pochettino. We know it's and I hope that he rides off into the sunset a legend after 2026. But the amount of money that the Federation spent and the unique way in which they got that money, going out there and getting, hedge fund billionaire types of folks to, put in the kitty, that's interesting. And that's creative. And while the Federation, you and I and others, we can certainly at times find real fair criticisms of the Federation. I think in this moment, they went out and they shot their shot. And I think they got the best available. You could say Klopp was there, but he's not available. It's not he didn't want to do it, obviously, and didn't want to coach. So I think at least one of the best available out there. They're paying for it, and I wasn't surprised. I do think that it would have been interesting, the reaction, had they hired someone like a Steve Cherundolo or Wilfred Nancy or these type of domestic MLS types of coaches, which I think a lot of people would have seen as uninspired type of choice. And that's just the way the world works and what Pochettino is. And he may or may not be better than anybody else that we have here, but he is a sexy name. He does have a pedigree. People around the world know him, and he brings a cachet, and there is value to that.
Yeah. I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking.
That's okay. That's cool. I just heard my wife a little while ago, so I got my wife, I got my dog, we got it all.
Well, the mailman, she's got an ongoing rivalry with him, so drives her crazy. But you mentioned about Steve Cherundolo and Wilfred Nancy. I wouldn't have necessarily been disappointed if they went in the direction of Nancy, because I think he might be the best coaching prospect MLS has ever produced. And I'm not saying that to slight like Bruce Arena or Bob Bradley or these other good managers. It's just, I think he's kind of like the crown jewel. Like, he's doing things that a lot of people haven't done early on in a league that's expanded with 30 teams or 29, 30 next year. But I am happy that they didn't hire a coach like Steve Cherundolo, because that would have felt like the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing and expecting different results. I don't see there's there's not a significant distinction between Cherundolo and Berhalter. So that would have been kind of just doing the same thing with a different name. I'm happy what's
the distinction between Nancy and Cherundolo?
Well, he's an outsider, right? He's so
it's because he's foreign.
Well, I mean, he's got a different perspective, and he's also won like with a lesser team. In Montreal, he took them to this.
But so has Steve Cherundolo. But
with a lesser team.
But I don't understand why, just because he's American.
No. So my perspective on him is because he has been able to take a team that was cheap, didn't have a lot of resources in Montreal, and he was able to finish in the second place in the Eastern Conference, which is impressive. Steve Cherundolo has struggled to win with a team that's loaded, arguably the best team from top to bottom in MLS, and he's only won one MLS Cup.
Yeah, he just won an Open Cup a couple days ago. He's been to 4 finals. All right,
he's lost them though.
All right, he's in a league, and Wilfred Nancy is operating in a league that has parity and structured parity, and so that does give an equality. And I'm not saying everybody's equal, but relative to the rest of the world, there's an equality. So you can argue that it is easier to do what Nancy has done in a league like MLS than, for example, if he was taking a mid to lower level EPL team and having them finish top 4. So yeah, I mean, I to your point, I know you would be disappointed, and there are many like you that would have been disappointed. I I challenge why you would be disappointed. If it's because you truly feel that he is not as good a coach as insert whoever your coach is, that's fine. But if you back it up because, well, he's an outsider, all right, then why, then should we just say, all right, well, we'll just go get somebody that doesn't have an American passport, and that automatically is better, and we can hire him or her.
Well, the reason why I honestly didn't want him is, like I said, I think that he's underperformed with the talent he's had. Now, you pointed out they just
okay. What about Jim Kerr? Jim Curtin? Would you be okay with Jim Curtin? Nah, he's American. You don't want him.
No,
right?
it's not. It's not because Jim Curtin's American. It's just because he hasn't done anything really spectacular. Like I said with Wilfried Nancy, he took a team that was Montreal is abysmal. They don't spend any money. He finished second place in the East, and a lot of people said, "Hey, what would happen if they gave this guy just a little bit more resources?" And what did he do? He went to Columbus, and they won the MLS Cup the first year.
Well, look what Jim Curtin has done with Philadelphia. They don't give him crap to work with over there.
Yeah, but that's the thing is, why has he moved on? Why did he not take the chance to go to Cincinnati when he had the opportunity? A team that would have spent more. Why did he not take a chance to maybe showcase his talents a little more and prove that he could win with more spending?
Not only is he American, but he's unmotivated. There you go.
I do believe he might be a little complacent. He's been the manager for Philadelphia for 10 years, and he doesn't have an MLS Cup. I mean, you have to at least win an MLS Cup to, I believe, qualify for the national team job. You have to have that in your cabinet. Then you'll say, well, Dolo's got an MLS Cup, but he's also coaching the best team in the league. Do we give Pep Guardiola, extra credit because he wins with Man City?
Okay, well, yeah. I mean, Pep doesn't have an MLS Cup.
No, he doesn't have an MLS Cup. But I'm just saying though that like it's expected for them to win.
Right. Well,
these are expected, and they haven't won though. They've lost 4 trophies. I think Steve Cherundolo is 2 out of 6 in his last finals. He lost the CONCACAF Champions League final. He lost MLS Cup last year. By the way, who did he lose to?
Jim Curtin's unmotivated, and Steve Cherundolo is a loser. Got it. These are the highlights. These are the hashtag the crap out of that. That's good.
Hey, who did Steve Cherundolo lose to in the final last year?
Okay, fair enough. There you go.
And I'm sure you've watched the matches. Do you not think he's outclassing him, like tactically?
Nancy I think Nancy is wonderful. I love him as a coach. I love what he's doing. But I don't differentiate between him and Steve Cherundolo or others out there. If Bruce Arena had gone and done what is happening in Columbus right now, you would not be extolling his virtues.
Oh, I love Bruce Arena. I think I do. It has nothing to do with their nationality. It's just I'm impressed with what Nancy's done in such a short amount of time with his resources he's had, and I think that he's, like I said, he's a crown jewel manager. I don't care about nationality. If Steve Cherundolo had won like 3 MLS Cups in a row and was just absolutely firing on all cylinders, I'd say, well, hey, we might have a special coach in the making here, on the up and up. But I'm not saying that Dolo can never be the national team coach. I just think with a guy who's only had 3 years of head coaching experience, that's a very risky hire to make to arguably take us into the most important year of our soccer history.
He didn't care that Argentina hired an assistant coach to coach their team to a World Cup. So.
But the talent disparity.
You're coaching, so he just throws the ball out, and they play, and obviously Messi on there and all that kind of stuff. All right, well, I mean, we're not gonna agree on this, other than I think we do agree that Wilfried Nancy is a quality coach, and I would have had no problem with Wilfried Nancy. But even if it had been Wilfried Nancy, I do think that there is certainly a segment out there that would look at it as settling, if you will. And that, that's just the MLS bias or anti-bias, however you want to look at it. And there's nothing we can do about that other than call it out. So when it comes to Pochettino, I think that was a whole nother level. I think there's, for a American soccer fan base that I think has been kind of divided relative to the national team, I do think that Pochettino's hiring has brought a lot more people together and united a whole lot more people, which is ultimately what needed to be done given the failure this summer. And we should not be less than 2 years away from the most important summer in American soccer history. and not feel like we're heading in the right direction, not feel confident and excited and joyous about what is about to come here. So I do think that Pochettino has checked that box and done that for me, you, and a lot of people that maybe in the past, or certainly up to this summer, would have been kind of separated into our sides and arguing about things.
Yeah, and I just want to circle back and ask you one more thing about Greg, just real quick, and then we'll tie a bow on Greg's tenure as the manager. Were you surprised that he was fired after being grouped? Did you think that was even a possibility? I mean, I personally didn't think that. I thought he was going to probably be safe no matter what, just because they wouldn't really put too much stock into the Copa performance because they liked everything else he had done up until that point.
I do think that when the for lack of a better word, when the mainstream sports media starts picking up on stories and more importantly, negative stories, which is what happened this summer, I do think that there is an internal pressure that is different than when the usual soccer folks are screaming and yelling about it. And that includes myself and others. And I think that there was a recognition that, hey, this is bad. Even people that hadn't even looked at the men's team for a while said, my goodness, we're 2 years away from a World Cup, and this is what's happening. This is embarrassing. Why are we like this? And then a lot of the same kind of evergreen criticisms and discussions out there of, why can't we win a World Cup, a men's World Cup, and why haven't we advanced, played into it. So I do think that there was some pressure, and I do think that they thought, hey, if there ever was a time to do it, this is the time. We can justify it from a results standpoint on the field of what happened in the summer, and internally, I think Matt Crocker can say, I can get somebody better, because you never fire somebody unless you have somebody better that that you can get in. I know the discussion right now about a team like Manchester United right now. It's a valid and fair discussion, but if there isn't somebody else out there that is going to come in and do a better job, or you think is going to come in and do a better job that is available, then it's hard to do it. And so it all kind of stars aligned in a negative sense, but also in a positive sense in terms of the U.S. Soccer Federation and Matt Crocker being able to pull it off this summer.
Yes, yeah, and I think that I'd like to think some of the credit would go to some of the angry fans, but like you said, I do think that, I mean, maybe you could say that the angry fans being so loud is what got the media's attention to really run with it. Maybe you could say that, sure. A chain reaction. But yes, at a certain point, I honestly was having doubts that they would actually move off of him, because it took a little longer than you would expect, especially after being grouped. It took like 2 weeks, I think, before they finally announced it after getting grouped, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe it was only a week.
Yeah, it took a while. That was a little frustrating. And I know we're on the outside, and there's certain things that happen on the inside that, are realities of doing a deal and doing your due diligence. Although, Matt Crocker and the Federation has been very clear that they had, lists and kind of a line of succession if and when this were to happen, as anybody should do when they are in those positions. But it still took a while, and the radio silence from the outside was disappointing and frustrating. But I've also been on the inside, and sometimes you can't let all the squawking on the outside dictate what you are going to do, especially making an important decision like this relative to 2026.
Yeah, and so I wanted to transition to obviously the next era of USMNT soccer. Pochettino's the manager, and one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what player do you expect to benefit from the most from his appointment? What player do you think he can help grow as a player and maybe turn into something we haven't seen already?
Yeah, so like I said, he's not a magician, but I do think that the way that he has talked about this team is that there is a clean slate. And so, when you're talking about players that either we have seen before but haven't been involved in a while, or we haven't seen before, I think it's going to be minimal. I mean, we can talk about your Julian Greens and these types of players. We can talk about let's see, who was the Fossey kid that we saw in the last window, these types of players. And I do think that there will be a recognition of, that with this new sheriff, anything is possible. But he's not just going to arrive and all of a sudden the talent is going to change. Yeah, I think there will be some opportunities, but I think there will be remnants of what has already happened in that, when you look at the goalkeeping position right now, I think it's open. And so then you talk about, in the most irony of ironies, does Zach Steffen pull a Zach Steffen back on Matt Turner and get back into it or something like that, or Slanina and these type of players? And is Matt Turner really the incumbent? I do think that back line right now, I'm just Tim Richards for me. I think he's a good player. I'm not necessarily sure that he is a great player. Oh, I'm sure he's not a great player. I'm just worried about, can he be a great player? And so I'm worried about that back line. We know that Dest has been hurt, so there are some opportunities when it comes to that right side, at least for the short term. And if hopefully Dest gets back, he slides into that right position. Jedi's been great at the left back position there. Tyler Adams' injury right now, while he's a great player and I want him on my team, he doesn't help us if he is constantly hurt. And that applies to Gio Reyna too. So there's a lot of questions when it comes to this team. And then the big, question and the evergreen question is who plays in that number 9 position. We're coming off a pretty good weekend. Flo Balogun scored. Pepe finally got a start and got 2 goals. So that was good. And that was important. Josh Sargent featured and got a couple of assists. So hopefully everybody stays healthy and comes in. And then, we just saw this Olympic team play, and there's some possibilities there, but I'm not sure. I think there'll be maybe a couple players that haven't been involved that are able to make the team in 2026. But for the most part, it's going to be, I think, your usual suspects. And therefore, you're just asking Pochettino to make them play better. When it comes to Pulisic, we're seeing the best Pulisic that we have seen in his career. So we hope that translates to continued impact when it comes to the national team.
So we'll start back with the goalkeeper, because I think that, like you said, that is a question mark that a lot of people are uneasy about. They don't know who's going to be starting in goal. There's not even a hint of who could be starting in goal, because Matt Turner hasn't got enough playing time, right? He's been riding the pine, and unfortunately, when he went to Arsenal, he was supposedly going to be play all the extra games, probably get significant minutes, like maybe play 20 games a year, maybe not as much as you'd like, but he was going to play. And it didn't really turn out like that. So I think Matt Turner needs to, and I think we will see this. I think he will probably end up returning back to MLS, which is not a bad thing. I think the most important thing for him is to get minutes, to stay in form. Look at Zach Steffen, like you said, he went to Man City. He was on loan army. He went to a couple different spots. He got injured. He kind of stagnated on the bench. And a lot of people thought this national team career was over. Then he comes back to Colorado this winter, and he's arguably playing the best soccer of his career, at least close to what he was playing in 2018, 2019 with the Columbus Crew. And then Gaga, obviously, we don't really know what he can do yet. I mean, he's still 20 years old, 19 years old, but he hasn't taken that step where you're like, hey, this is the future. Like, this guy is 100% going to be the USMNT goalkeeper for 10 years plus, right? That's what he was heralded as when he was playing for Chicago, got the move to Chelsea, but that really hasn't translated yet. He's still young, though, because as you know, goalkeepers can take a while. He's only 20 years old. I think Ethan Horvath is kind of I think he's kind of fallen out of good graces, at least with the fan base. A lot of people are very sour on him as a prospect.
Schulte, there's a bunch of goalkeepers out there, but none of them, to your points, have stepped up and grabbed the opportunity.
Yes, and Schulte is a player that I would like to see get a couple call-ups and see if he can maybe separate himself, because he's been very good with the Columbus Crew. I think Schulte's a very good goalkeeper. Bright future. He's only 23. And look, this is one thing that I kind of this defer with other USMNT fans is I don't care what league you're playing in. I care about what your form is, and I think that's really. Would you rather have a goalkeeper who's playing at Arsenal but not actually playing, or would you rather have the best goalkeeper in MLS in starting in your goal? I mean, what are we even talking about here? Yeah. You want the guy who's actually playing well.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say, but in practice, sometimes it's more difficult. And I think you hit on a couple of things here. Number one, the grass is not always greener. Well, to be fair, from a money perspective, often the grass or the green, I guess, is greener, but it's not always softer. All right. And you can stunt your growth as an actual player, and if you want to go to Europe, and I know I don't begrudge any of these players wanting to go to Europe. They grow up dreaming. This is an ambition. And if you want to go to Europe, there are flights leaving every hour on the hour from JFK to LAX and everywhere in between. But going to the right place, to your point, that's a different story where you're comfortable on the field and you're comfortable off the field. And that's not always easy. And so you can hurt your growth and you can stunt it. And again, if you talk to Zach Steffen, while it didn't go the way that he maybe envisioned it, I still think that he benefited from the experience. And whether it's just from the life experience of going to different countries and different languages and different cultures and all that kind of stuff, or the actual on the field, even though it didn't go well. But, this is MLS moves, right? And so the perception of Major League Soccer is something that you talk about, that we all talk about, often. And I'll be really interested to see what Pochettino's perception and maybe reality is of Major League Soccer and how he views players that are, to your point, playing consistently and playing consistently well, but they are doing it in Major League Soccer as opposed to a player that is maybe not playing or maybe not playing well or not playing consistently when it comes to a team, but he's doing it over in wherever, pick your country over there in Europe, and how that changes how we look at things, how coaches look at things. And we have seen in the past, Greg Berhalter, I think for his first cycle, he was much more MLS oriented than his second cycle. And maybe that was just by design or by the growth of this young team and a lot of them moving to Europe and doing that kind of stuff. You look at, Jurgen Klinsmann, who famously was, I don't want to say anti-MLS, because here's a guy who brought up Jordan Morris and that kind of stuff, but he certainly, I think, looked down at MLS. I think Bruce Arena was much more pro-MLS. Bob Bradley was maybe in the middle. I'll be interested to see ultimately where Pochettino falls in terms of his view of Major League Soccer. Because I think if you poo-poo it and look down on it, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I think you're doing a disservice to the country, in this case, America, that you're representing as the coach. But I also think that you're hamstringing yourself when it comes to getting the best team. Yeah, I want the best players. All right. But ultimately, I want the best collection of players. And yeah, I don't care where they come from. And there's part of me when I'm watching this national team sometimes that say, you know what? Sometimes I just give me the best 11 MLS players that are going to fight, that are going to scrap, that are going to give everything they possibly can, maybe because they haven't been given as much as others. And maybe that's the way to go. Now, that's being a little bit flip and a little bit facetious in the way that we're talking about it. But again, I do think that if Pochettino really is true to what he has said so far, he opens it up. And again, he, to your point, doesn't care where you're kicking the ball as long as you're kicking the ball well. And he feels that the way you kick the ball can help him win games.
Well, you just brought up a very interesting point. And I wanted to touch on this as well. When Pochettino comes into the locker room, he needs to have everybody's head on a swivel. No guarantees for any players anymore. With Greg, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but I feel like there were players that were too comfortable. Like, no matter what happens, I'm guaranteed a call up, especially if the tournament or the game matters. I'm getting called up. And I think that was a problem because it, like I said, bred complacency. That's bad for growth. Players don't have any type of urgency when they feel like they're safe. They feel safe. And I feel like his rosters were just too consistent as far as the same players over and over again, not really trying anything new, getting some players in, see if they're good, giving more MLS players call-ups, like you said. And I'm not saying it has to be a full 23 of MLS players, but giving a player maybe like Schulte, who is in good form, more opportunities to see if he's the real deal. And Pulisic, right? My biggest gripe about Pulisic is I don't think that he has been as good of a captain as, captains in the past USMNT. He's not leading the charge. He's not getting these guys fired up. He's not having that grit or having these guys play with that grit that your team played with, that Landon's team played with, that Clint's team played with. It's missing. And I think that what would really be beneficial, Alexi, is what happens if Pochettino comes in the locker room one day and says, okay, hey, we don't have a captain right now. It's going to have to be earned. Give me that armband, Christian. It's still up in the air. This armband is going to have to be earned, not given. That would just put the whole team on notice. And I think that's what they need.
Yeah, I think you hit on, the shared responsibility of the failure of this team. Um, I do think that Greg Berhalter, and it's so hard, especially from the outside, because as a coach, that the dynamic is so important. And some players you got to kick in the ass, and some players you got to pat on the back. And yes, guess what? It's not AYSO. Not everybody plays. And yes, there are players that you have a different relationship with others. That's just the way that it works. It will happen with Pochettino. It happened with Greg Berhalter. But when it becomes detrimental, and to your point, where you're playing favorites that either blind you to other opportunities out there, or create some sort of dysfunction because of the way that other players in the locker room perceive it. Yeah, that's a problem. Now, that's on Greg, and he would probably say, look, it's a balance, and it goes back and forth, and at times when I got that balance, it was out of balance. But he also recognized that there were players that at times needed a kick in the ass, or at times needed a pat on the shoulder. However, what has been interesting, and I think rather disappointing and irritating to me, is when players have come out and said that they got too complacent and they needed a kick in the ass. Well, you know what? When that whistle blows, as much as we talk about coaches and managers, I think soccer, more than any sport, is left up to the players. You had ample opportunity to change that in the locker room, and certainly when you got on the field. All right. And yeah, we all want to be motivated by others, but at some point you're professionals. All right. And you should be able to self-motivate. And so I do think it's kind of a cop-out when some of these players are now talking, after they extolled the virtues, after they told us how much they loved and supported Greg Berhalter, to now come out and say, yeah, but he wasn't hard enough on us. You know what? Spare me that. Okay. Again, this isn't AYSO. You need to be able to motivate yourself. And I'm not discounting motivation, whether it comes to Greg Berhalter or Pochettino, is important. But the shared responsibility and the responsibility that players at this point now seem to be abdicating, I think that's a little rich.
Yeah, and do you feel that maybe Greg was too timid or afraid? And now, like you said a minute ago, you got to kind of know who you're dealing with. Pat on the ass, or hey, get let into somebody. But do you feel like maybe Greg was a little too timid or afraid to check certain egos? Like McKinney, right? McKinney had one of the worst performances I've seen in his career at Copa America, and he looked out of shape. Like he looked like he wasn't fit, which is crazy because he arguably had his best season of his career at Juve the previous or before the Copa America started. So that was concerning for that short of time for him to come in there and already look like he hadn't played soccer in 4 months. That I feel like not any other manager, but a manager should hold him responsible. Hey, listen, you're clearly not in form. You don't look like you're in shape. You're not going to play because you're going to be a detriment to this team. So we're going to go put someone else in there who is in form, who's playing better. And I just feel like, do you feel like maybe he was afraid to step on any toes?
Yeah, or he was pragmatic. And every coach will tell you that, yeah, that sounds great, but I didn't have somebody that could do what Weston McKennie could do. Even a 80% Weston McKennie, if you're looking at it and you say, yeah, but that 80% is better than what I can put on. And while I may feel better because Weston's dogging it, or Weston's overweight, or Weston's just not doing what we need him to do, the reality is that he still has moments of magic, and he's unfortunately the best that we have. And that could be, an indictment on the talent pool that they have. And I'm not saying, I'm just using Weston as an example. And Greg Berhalter I don't think he was necessarily afraid. I do think at times, if he had to do it over again, he might have, used moments and, sent a message, if you will, in terms of his selection. And that's on him. And he didn't do that. But I've also been in situations where players are incredibly frustrating to a manager, and they're tearing their hair out because they're not what they want them to be. But they can't make a change because either that player has too much power, or from a realistic standpoint, there is nobody better that is waiting in the wings. So until you actually have somebody to step up and take that position, it's hard to make changes like that.
Yeah, obviously, like you said, you're not in the locker room. There's a lot of variables, and also to not having a player. But I just like just knowing how you are and your personality. Wouldn't you rather have a guy who maybe is maybe he's less talented than McKinney, but he's going to give, like you said, that more effort, that more grit. And like maybe he just didn't have a guy like that on this team from the players he selected. But that's what Pochettino, he's able to look at what Greg Berhalter's shortcomings were and correct them, right? Do something different. That's why I want to see more players on this team who just feel like they're fighting for something. I mentioned that earlier. It feels like our players are just feel like they've reached the pinnacle because of what club team they play for, and they don't give a damn about proving themselves with the USMNT because they're, hey, I played for Juve. What do I need to prove?
Yeah, I don't want Pochettino to be the star. As big as a name as he is, I want the biggest personality. I want the biggest star. I want the biggest badass to be the players on the field. And that's, I think, how we approached it in the past. For better or worse, we were a bunch of alphas out there and we were running around, and that's kind of what we did. I don't want the biggest star for this U.S. men's national team to be Pochettino. I know he is a sexy name, but I want the biggest star, I want the biggest personalities, and I want the biggest badasses to be the players on the field, because I think that's what wins games. And I think that's what's missing from this team. And again, not to grumpy old man it, but that's kind of who we were in the past. We were a bunch of alphas running around, and for better or worse, that's how we were successful. And I think at times there's not enough of that in this group. And I wouldn't care other than I think that it's in there. And maybe Pochettino's greatest challenge and therefore greatest potential success will be drawing that out, either with the players that exist or maybe adding one or two that can help draw that out. Because unless that happens, then it's just Pochettino screaming and yelling on the sidelines, and that is not going to ultimately be enough.
Well, one other player that I wanted to talk about, because you've been under hot water, I've been under hot water because I agreed with you, and I want to talk about Pulisic, who you said at this moment is a top 25 player in the world. Now, I agree with you, and I think people need to relax and understand what we're saying. We're not saying he's the top 25, he's the 25th most or top 25 most talented player in the world. We're just saying at the current moment, power ranking system, there's not 25 other players playing better football than him at this moment. And people want to get it want to misconstrue it or say, well, hey, this he's not better than Vinny Jr. He's not better than Son from Tottenham. It's like, look, I understand it's only been 6 games, but at this moment, he is playing better than a lot of players that you would probably say are better players than him. It can fluctuate, it can change, but right now, he is playing the best football of his career.
Yeah, again, this goes back to this insecurity and inferiority complex that we have that is legendary. Because if Christian Pulisic was an American, I don't think a lot of people would have had a problem with that. Also, you can argue that Christian Pulisic right now, as we've talked about right now, in this snapshot of what's going on right now, is the best player in Serie A. Okay? So try to argue that the best player in Serie A, even in 2024 Serie A, okay, doesn't deserve or shouldn't be included in a conversation about the best 25 players in the world. I think that that's ludicrous. He is playing his best soccer. He is doing it consistently. Yes, it's early days, and this could dramatically change going forward right now. But also when you throw out Vinny Jr. and stuff like that, because people say, oh, Man City and all that kind of stuff. I believe that he is world-class in that if Christian Pulisic right now parachuted into any of these teams, Man City, Liverpool, Real Madrid, Barcelona, I don't think he'd miss a beat. All right, that's how good he is. Now he hasn't always lived up to that talent, and he hasn't always produced that consistency. But that's where I'm coming from right now, and it's amazing to me to see how many American fans, they show their true colors and they show their true insecurity by not being able to wrap their little brains around something like this, which I don't even think is that controversial when it comes to it. But you got to be careful, my friend. You stand too close to this flame here, you can get burned. You can get burned. But I stand by it, and I think it's completely. And of all my takes that I've had over the years, I recognize that some may be more inflammatory than others. I don't even think that this rises to the level of a completely scorching hot take.
Yeah, I'm a little confused on how people could think that's controversial when he's literally leading Serie A in goals. Like, I know they say, but it's only been 6 games. Okay, but that's still like 16% of the regular season. It's like it's been one match where he scored a hat trick. Like, we got 6 games. There's a decent enough sample size, and if he continues this trend, he'll cement himself as a top 25 player of this year. And I think Alexi, if he continues this, and that's the key. Mm-hmm. Can he continue it? Can he stay healthy? That's always been the thing that's derailed his season, is can he stay healthy? If he stays healthy and plays like this the rest of the year, I agree with you. I think he will probably win the Serie A Footballer of the Year. And I might be a little bit more bullish on the league than maybe you are. I think it's the second best league in the world, top to bottom. I think it's a very solid league. I think La Liga has kind of taken a huge hit. Now, the Bundesliga, you could maybe argue, is right there with Serie A. Mm-hmm. Either way, 2 to 3, being the best player or playing the best in that season in the second or third best league in the world is damn impressive. And I don't know why USMNT fans would try to downplay that.
Yeah, I just think that there's, kind of a hangover when it comes to Serie A in terms of, that the dip that it took. But to your point, I absolutely agree with you in terms of the quality now in Serie A. And you can say that this isn't one of the greatest Milan teams and all that kind of, and sure, okay, you're comparing it to the heyday and all that kind of stuff. But, times have changed, and there's no denying what he is doing for AC Milan and doing in this Serie A that I think we both agree right now is comparable to other great leagues in the world. And so it's wonderful. We are excited about it, especially when we look at it through the lens of, American glasses. And obviously when it comes to the national team, I do think that Christian Pulisic, relative to his national team performances, has been pretty good. And I think he can get better. I think he can become more of a leader on and off the field for this team. And I do think that, we started watching Christian Pulisic when he was a teenager, right? And so who he was as a player and as a person is dramatically different than who he is now in his mid-20s. And I mean, just his physical changes and his understanding of what he can and can't do and how he takes care of his body. And you mentioned his injuries, which has always been a problem. And I'm going to knock on wood here. I don't want to see him obviously get injured. But if he has found a nice, rich vein of form that keeps him healthy and enables him to be on the field, especially with this team where he's getting plenty of chances and he's showing up all sorts of different places on that Milan field, that's great, because I still don't even think we've seen the best version of Christian Pulisic. So there's still a ceiling that I don't think he has hit yet. But this is fun times for him, and obviously fun times for Americans that are able to watch.
This is a question I've wanted to ask you for a while. And this is about a player that you're very familiar with. I think you'd call him a friend. Maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. But how would you compare Christian Pulisic to, because I think we both agree he's in his prime right now, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously he plays for a team where he's going to get, well, in general, more notoriety because he's, playing in a better league than traditionally other USMNT players historically. How would you compare Christian Pulisic to a in-prime Landon Donovan, a player that you're very familiar with? A lot of people will say that he didn't reach his potential because he stayed in MLS, but how would you compare it to? They're very similar. They're very comparable players, at least playing-wise. How would you compare them?
Yeah, their size, they got to be close to the same size. So that's similar. I do think that there's a smoothness in the way that Christian Pulisic dribbles that I think is different than Landon. Landon was a little more, for lack of a better word, raw, but I think Landon was also more ruthless in the way that he went, to be fair, also a goal that Christian scored a couple goals ago where he kind of shot the gap right down the middle of the field as the defenders they all converged on him, but he was faster. He let the ball do the work. That was wonderful to see, because there was a ruthlessness in the way that he went about went about that. It'd be interesting if you asked who would you rather have on your team, a Christian Pulisic, this version of Christian Pulisic, or a Landon Donovan prime, where you want to put him. That's a hard one. I don't think that they are as similar as maybe you do in terms of what they do. They both like to get out wide, and they both like to kind of find space, and I think they both like to get away from the forest of trees, because I don't think that they are the best when there is a lot of activity, when there are a lot of players, when they're trying to get through multiple players. And so I do think they like to string themselves out wide and I think they do their best work out there. They both like to kind of come in from that off wing, both right-footed, but both like at times like to go out there on that left-hand side, although we've seen Christian and Landon, for that matter, over the years do well on the right-hand side. But when they get in the middle, and sometimes they get forced in the middle, I think it actually poses problems for both of them. But I think they're very similar in that their value. And if you were, picking teams out there on the sand lot, and Christian and Landon were available right now, man, that would be hard right now. I think it's a toss up right now. I'd probably go with Landon just out of nostalgia, and ultimately I think his national team career ultimately was better than Christian's than Pulisic's, but Pulisic still has plenty of time to make up that ground when it comes to the international game.
I like to think of it as kind of like an alternate universe, right? Landon Donovan obviously played in Europe at a very young age in the Bundesliga, and it didn't really pan out for him, maybe lack of opportunity, whatever it may be. Then he went to San Jose and became a star, right? I like to think of maybe Pulisic is what Landon would have been if he had gotten the opportunity to really, showcase his talents and an opportunity to grow. Now, I can't say one way or another if I believe that Donovan is a lesser version of himself because he played most of his career in MLS, because he was our best national team player through most of his career, and he played in MLS. Yeah. And a lot of his fellow countrymen played in Europe. Dempsey, Bradley, Howard, all these players played in Europe. But I think that, I do agree with you that their style of play is a little different. Pulisic has a little bit more, a couple qualities that are just a little better than Landon, but they are. I feel like those two players will always be connected in some sort, because Pulisic was supposed to be this era's Landon Donovan, LD, but the better version. And I was just curious to see if you thought that was the case. That's interesting. I think Landon Donovan, because of some of the comments he's made, maybe is for some people kind of forget what he did for this national team. Yeah. He's not really in the good graces of a lot of national team fans, but he's a legend. He's one of the best players, if not the best player we've ever had.
Yeah, and to be fair to Landon and that generation, and while there were plenty of us that went overseas, and I was before him, so it was even more what I'm about to kind of lay out here. We only see the good, right? But it can be incredibly, and I'm not crying for anybody over there, or myself for that matter, but it can be an incredible adjustment, and it can be incredibly lonely. And Christian went over there when he was very young. Obviously, Landon went over when he was very young, but they went over in very, very different times. And I'm not saying that Christian hasn't struggled, but even things like communication and the internet and the connection that we have that makes it that much easier, and even players around you. I mean, Christian plays with one of his national team teammates. He has also players that are playing Americans, many more Americans that are playing in Serie A, and that kind of stuff. All of that can matter in terms of your bedding in, and in terms of your adaptability, and in terms of your comfort level there. And this isn't, and again, Christian's mentality might be very different than Landon's mentality. Landon knew what he needed to do to be the best version of himself. And I think Christian certainly does. And who knows, maybe there is an MLS future in Christian's career. And if and when that happens, it'll be fun to see, and people will say what they're going to say. But ultimately, like we said before, as long as you're someplace that you're playing and you're happy, and that you are in your, like I said, you're at least attempting to get your best version of yourself, and it doesn't really matter where you are. And both of them are great players. I think both of them, Landon already, and Christian is well on his way to becoming a American soccer legend, and someone that will be revered and celebrated for a long time to come for what he has done and the doors that he's kicked open, and obviously what he has done on the field and off the field for American soccer.
Yeah, I think that Pulisic is destined for MLS. I don't know when. I would assume maybe even after the 26 World Cup. It seemed like that would be poetic. That would seem, that would make a lot of sense, especially capitalize off of hopefully a successful event we have here.
Right.
And then bring over the guy who you would assume would play a hand in their success. Now, transitioning to that, 2026. We digest a lot. We talked a lot about this team, about moving parts, about players, about the coach, the shortcomings. What realistically should the expectations be now that a lot of fans, including myself, said, hey, we think we have the players. We think our shortcomings is the coach. Give us the coach. Let's see if this thing, which is truly the issue. Now hey, they put their money where their mouth is. We got the coach. We've got the talent. What are the expectations, Alexi?
The expectations are that we see a team do things that we haven't seen in the past. Now, in 2002, we're potentially a handball away from going to a semifinal. So we've been to the quarterfinals of a World Cup. We've beaten our major rival in Mexico, our major rival that was Mexico in that same 2002 World Cup. So we had a nice path. There's going to be another round because of the size of the World Cup. So potentially, depending on where we finish in terms of groups, we could actually have an 8-game type of situation, which isn't the worst thing in the world. But when all is said and done, whether it's where you finish in terms of winning the World Cup or going to a semifinal or going to a quarterfinal, I mean, getting out of the group isn't even a question, right? Getting out of a round of 32 isn't even a question. Getting into the 16, then, sometimes you come up against a team that's just better than you, or you come up on one of those days and things can happen. But if and when the whistle blows to end the 26 World Cup for the U.S. men's national team, I want us to all look around and say, you know what? This is exciting. We used this to not just make the rest of the world think that we've come far and that we are heading in the right direction, but maybe more importantly, to make ourselves feel confident that we are heading in the right direction. I want to have seen things that make me proud. I want to have seen things that I can say, you know what? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. And because of the work that we have done on and off the field, we are able to make that happen. And that can be a pass, that can be a win, that can be an environment that we create. All of those different things I think are important. But that's ultimately what a success is for the World Cup. I mean, I tell you this all the time. I'm sitting here talking to you today because of the 1994 World Cup. And we have that opportunity again to not just change individuals. Yeah, that's going to happen in 26, but to change the perception of the game in the way, like I said, the rest of the world looks at us, but also the way that we look at ourselves. And 2026 is not 1994. It's not 1999. It's a very, very different landscape, but the potential is the same. I would even say the potential is greater, but we got to accept it. We have to recognize it, and we have to harness it and own it. And if and when we do that, both on and off the field, then you maximize this opportunity that you have. And so when that whistle blows that ends the U.S. men's national team's World Cup, maybe it's the last whistle of the World Cup. We should be so lucky. Or that last whistle does happen of the World Cup over there in New York for the final. And when I say New York, I mean New Jersey. I want us to look around and say, you know what? We milked it for all it was worth. And then that next day after the circus leaves town, we are in a better place than when we started.
Yeah, and I want to see this team punch above their weight again, man. That's what we're historic for. We punch above our weight. And I know he gets a lot of flack, but just go back in the time machine for a second and look at 2014. I always hammer this. That group stage was Ghana, Germany, and Portugal. And Ronaldo was 28 years old at that time, so 29. Yep. So he was in his prime. He was the best version of himself. And we were able to make it out of that group stage. I would find it hard to believe this past Copa America team would have made it out of a group stage that hard just because of the way they were playing and they just looked like, I mean, we couldn't even make it out of a group with Panama, Uruguay, and the last team slipped my mind, Bolivia. Yes, exactly. We couldn't even make it out of that group. So I want to see that, just that grit return, man. Every USMNT fan and person I speak with always mentions the word grit. This team doesn't have it, and we need to try to um, find that again. We need to try to make that our identity. I can't even tell you what our identity was under Berhalter. Like what was our identity as a team?
Yeah, I think in our desire to evolve, our desire to grow, a lot of times we look at what we were in the past as a caveman-esque type of style and rudimentary and raw, and we poo-poo it. And again, we just got to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater as we progress, because I think it's admirable to want to get better and to associate that with, more possession and a more sophisticated type of approach. But and as we wind this down, as it relates to the Copa America, what was so impressive to me was some of these teams that we look at as elite, your Colombias, your Uruguays, obviously your Argentinas. Underneath the surface of the glitz and the glamour and the sexiness is a real ruthlessness, is a real raw, physical, take no prisoners grit, to your point. And so I think that we have somehow lost the best part of ourselves in an effort to become better. And I think we can get it back, because I think it is innate. I think it is instilled in us, regardless of where you grew up. But if you don't tap into it, or like I said, you stifle it or poo-poo it, then I think you're just leaving one more part of the arsenal that can help you. And I think it does resonate with fans. And whether it's you, me, or anybody else out there, when we see it, not only do we know it, but we love it, and it excites us. And I think it can be as sexy as any of the evolved and progressive and romantic type of soccer that we are trying to achieve in terms of our progress and evolution.
Yeah. So look, this roster is going to be coming out soon. We're going to get to see our first sample size, our first look at Pochettino as a manager. All eyes are going to be on him. I would say that the interest is probably at maybe at an all-time high, but definitely at a high it's been a while, maybe even a decade. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. Be interesting to see who he calls in, how they play. Now, I think fans need to have some expectations. Now, they don't need to be expecting things to be firing on all cylinders in the first game, right? It's going to take time. Now, there could be a chance where they do look good in the first match, but don't expect that, because you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And if it does look good, don't get your expectations up even more. Like, these things are fluid, right? But I'm excited. I have hope. Because we've talked about this on air, off air. 2026 is the most important soccer year in this country. And 94 was very important. It's the groundwork. But 26 is where it could take this into a whole other just a whole another level in this country. So that's why they have to make the best of every opportunity we have. We didn't even talk about the MLS side of this. That's for another show. We'll do that some other time in the near future. But I can't say that the USMNT and the Soccer Federation left any stone unturned. They hired a big manager. They've got the players. Now it's time to get to work.
Absolutely. Amen, my friend. That sounds like a plan going forward. And look, I know we scream and yell and we criticize and we debate and we go back and forth, but I'm just excited to be in a place where, at least for the moment, we're all kind of together and excited and united about what's happening. And there will be time for criticism, and it'll be interesting to see who Pochettino brings in, how they play. I mean, do they change formation? Do they change style? Do we see a player that in the past was kind of in the background step to the fore and be given more responsibility? Do we see the players in total recognize that there is this kind of clean slate and maybe some different leadership show up? Or do we see somebody step up and grab hold of, whether it's the goalkeeping position or the number 9 position, all of those different things? They won't necessarily be answered in the first window or in the first games or anything like that. And this is a process, but this is all we have. And so the judgment, if you will commence with the first window, with the recognition and the respect that, yes, this is a work in progress, but the ramp that was real long a couple years ago when we were looking at it. It's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. We're less than 2 years away, which is exciting, but it also means we got to get to work. And I hope that Pochettino comes in, hits the ground running, not just in terms of the results, but in the, to use the vernacular right now of the political climate that we're in, a joyous type of situation here going forward. So hopefully he brings in some joy and all that, and get people good vibes, if you will.
Exactly. Alexi, listen, I appreciate you coming on with me. This was a good discussion. Hopefully the listeners enjoyed it, or maybe they didn't. Hey, let us know either way if you enjoyed it or hated what we said. I appreciate you, my friend. I appreciate you giving me the time. And also, I know that this doesn't bother you, but I do wish you would stop getting so much grief, because you are a genuinely good person. And everybody is entitled to their own opinion. But I think you're a genuinely good person, and you get way too much flack, and I'm proud to call you a friend.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I'm a glutton for punishment. I probably invite a lot of it on myself, but that's just kind of how I am. I really appreciate it. You're doing great work. You can check me out over there on the X machine, I guess it's called nowadays, or Instagram and all the different things. My State of the Union podcast with my good friend David Mossy over there at Fox. And, we're looking forward to obviously some really, really fun and interesting and joyous summers coming up, whether it's Gold Cup next summer or obviously 2026, which is just barreling down the road. So it's good times. It's good times to be an MLS fan. It's good times to be a U.S. men's soccer team fan. It's a good time just to be a soccer fan. Hey, it's a good time to be American.
Exactly. I'm fired up. It's going to be an interesting 2 years. Everybody should get their popcorn ready. It's going to be exciting times. And if it's not, hey, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for right now, no rain on the parade. Let's see what happens. Guys, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Until next time, I will see you all soon.